will go ahead and without further ado, we'll introduce Danielle Gagne. Danielle is with Volatus Aerospace. And before that, she was with Diversified Communications. So you might know her from commercial UAV news. She has been a real icon within this industry. So we're so pleased to have her come on up here. And over to you to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. So I'm going to try to give the spotlight to the great panelists here, but just to give you our title here is Show Me the Money. Who doesn't want that, right? Tapping into opportunities to work with the government. You know, this is one of the hardest and most challenging, but can be some of the most rewarding work we can do in this industry. But how do you do it? How do you qualify? How do you win that bid? Figuring out how to successfully win a contract can sometimes feel like winning the lottery. Just pure luck, right? So we have a great panel here today to help demystify some of that and where we can tap into some of these funds designed for emerging technologies like drones and how, sorry? Start on the far side. Okay. And how to navigate their expectations and processes. I am joined by Lauren Young, Product Marketing Manager at Modal AI, Jennifer Richter, Chair at TMT Practice Aiken Group, Renee Welch, PhD, Executive Administrator of U.S. entity We Robotics. Congratulations, by the way. And Zachary Doherty, Counsel at 3i Law. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves individually, starting with Zach over here on the end.
Hello, everyone. As you heard, I'm Zach Doherty. I'm an attorney here in Denver, so it was a short drive for me today. My practice at 3i is in the corporate and transactional practice area. I do a lot of work with drones also. So a lot of helping companies like small startups and growth stage companies get started, get funding, kind of plan for the future, that kind of stuff. I'm also on the board of directors for Mountain West UAS, and that's a 501c3 nonprofit based in small town in central Colorado, Buena Vista. So anyway, I'm here to kind of talk about both those things, and I'm really excited to get going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Young, and I head up marketing at Modal AI. I'm very excited to be here today to share with how our company, Modal AI, has partnered with the government since our inception on creating advanced drone technology to help propel the industry grow forward.
Hi there. I am Renee Welch. Some of you know me as the Chief Grantologist at Drone Grantology, but I am now in a new role at We Robotics, which is a nonprofit that puts power in the hands of developing countries to help them solve local problems using robotics technologies and drones. We've scaled up to over 40 countries now through our network of flying labs alongside of 250 local experts. And so my role will focus on operations and helping to take We Robotics to its 4th chapter with my co-pilot, Sonia Betskart.
Hi, everybody. Jennifer Richter here from Aiken. I like this Show Me the Money panel. I brought some money with me to Denver, which is good because this morning I woke up and realized that I brought one blue shoe and one black shoe. So I'm wearing my tennis shoes. So when you see me later this week, I want you to come check out my shoes because I bet they're going to be really nice. Nicer than today. Anyway, so I lead the TMT practice at Aiken. And we've been involved with the drone industry for the last decade or so, working with all different kinds of companies. So big OEMs from the aviation industry and the automotive industry on working on their UAS and AAM strategies, working with venture capital when they're looking to diligence a company in the space and wanting to make an investment, working with strategics who are buying some of these new advanced aviation aircraft, which is really exciting. Great to see that money coming into the sector. Working with CTIA on all the communication solutions for UAS. That's been a real passion project for the last number of years. And then working with great technology companies like Matrix Space, who's here today on their radar and connectivity solutions. So anyway, really fun space to be in and glad to be talking with all of you today. I have a couple of gifts for you. If you look in your bag that you got from Dawn this morning, this is like a technology folio for you with our new Aiken logo, which is really cool. So check that out. And then also in the bag, a little harder to find, is this little card. It has a QR code on it, and we just put together an advanced, I guess it's Autonomous Systems and Advanced Mobility white paper that 20 different lawyers in our firm worked on, and it's sort of a, what are we watching in the space right now? So definitely download the paper, which is for free.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to have you keep that mic because the first question is going to go to you. So can you discuss how authorities are tied to these agencies at the federal, state, and local levels?
You bet. And forgive my computer. There's so many great facts and figures, and I just didn't want to miss any of them. So funding opportunities come in lots of different ways. Most of them emanate from the federal government. And then sometimes it's federal to state. Sometimes it's federal to a different kind of organization that helps to administer the funds. So I'm going to talk through a few different flavors of funding opportunities that you should be watching for. The first is obviously the traditional grants and loans that come through typically from legislation through to an administrative agency who then runs a program and makes that funding available to you. And I would say in the 30 plus years that I've been practicing law, I've never seen so much funding available for technology and telecom and digital infrastructure and advanced transportation. So if you haven't looked, you really should, because there are lots of opportunities. With respect to these kinds of federal programs, the Congress is typically setting up the program with certain parameters, but then they really do delegate most of the work to create the rules for the program to the different agencies that are involved. So just last year, we got the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is amazing. It's over $1 trillion of funding for all different kinds of programs. And so one of those, there are like a dozen different funding programs, and one of them is the SMART program, which I think you're going to talk about some more. But they've already given out 59 projects were funded last year. 17 of them involved UAS or smart sensors. So roughly a third of the projects under the SMART program are really in this space, which is exciting. Another thing to think about, and it's come up a number of times this morning, is the digital infrastructure that's so key to supporting all of these new kinds of autonomous vehicles and advanced aviation. We need to have communities that are smarter in terms of their infrastructure so that they can support all of these innovations. So another place to look for funding is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund, which NTIA is operating. It's $60 billion, and all of that money is going to go from NTIA to the states and then out to people who, have successful programs for deploying that digital infrastructure. So another great place to look. Beyond traditional grant programs, there are some really cool opportunities with respect to OTAs. Who in the room knows what an OTA is? Okay, a few. It stands for Other Transaction Authority. What's nice about it, so this comes from Section 815 of the NDAA from 2016. You don't need to know that. And there was a prior version of it as well. But it authorizes agencies like DOD, DHS, DOE, NASA to enter into these other transactions. It's essentially a funding opportunity, but without the cumbersome FAR regulations applying. So that's amazing, because what that means is it gets the money out into businesses and communities faster. It gives smaller companies a better opportunity than they would normally have against some of the bigger players, right? So there are lots of benefits to OTAs. And one of the reasons that our government really feels it's important to have that is they want to get more of these innovative companies into the mix. So OTAs are a great thing to look for. A couple of organizations that we work with that have OTA authority include the National Spectrum Consortium, Now, you might not think in this room that that's applicable to you, but it really is. So they're building 5G, 6G test beds, sometimes with open radio access networks in all different areas, including on military bases. And then those test beds are used to test out connections to new kinds of technology, including UAS and AAM. So that is really something to be watching for. NSC, if you become a member of NSC, they have $2.5 billion to put toward prototyping and research and development in this space. That money, when they kind of come out with an RFP for a different project, their members can then bid on those projects and get involved that way. And more than half of their members are small companies, small startups. So, NSC is a good company to be watching out for. 2 projects they did in our space recently include a Hill Air Force Base test bed for airborne radar interference management and a 5G smart warehouse at Coronado that incorporated 5G for transshipments between shore facilities and naval units. So, it really is quite applicable to the work that you all in the room are doing. NASA also has this OTA authority that they use in conjunction with their Space Act agreements. Some of those are reimbursable and some are non-reimbursable. So if you want to work with NASA and utilize their facilities to test out your tech, they might require you to reimburse them for their expenses in order to participate with you in that program. On the other hand, if it's something that they really feel is mission critical also for them to do and understand, they might pay for their own expenses while you pay for your own. And that's another way of working with them. And then just finally, there are other kinds of organizations like US Ignite is a good example. They were set up by the White House, and they get a lot of their money from the National Science Foundation. And then they work, again, with military bases and communities to create digital infrastructure that they then use to test new kinds of technology. So they did, I think just in Colorado Springs, they did a program, an autonomous vehicle shuttle program. They set up a 5G network there and then used this network to try to help command and control that vehicle. They also, they've got a 5G network that's working with UAS in North Carolina. And then I think they've got another type of network working on unmanned systems in New York. So I certainly commend you to take a look for NSC and US Ignite and the work that they're doing, because there might be good intersections for you. And if you'd like me to intro you to the people running those organizations, I'm totally happy to do that.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that really in-depth overall. It's really, what I took away from that is that you really do need to think outside of the box where you can slot in what's already in play and how do drones impact that part of the industry. So don't just look for drones and grants. You kind of have to be a little bit more savvy with that. And talking about funding, Renee, can you talk about a little bit about what is available at the federal level and how we can tap into that, and where should we be looking for it?
Sure. Well, first, I'm going to say, based on the theme of exponential blueprint for autonomy, I would add the consideration for funding and financial resources in terms of operationalizing and integrating UAS systems from development to sustainability. Before we discuss where the money is, I want you to keep in mind, in terms of federal money, we've got to remember that the role of the government is to deliver public value. So keep in mind funding trends. For instance, this year, 2023, some of the trends include: 1, increased focus on climate action and sustainability; 2, community-led solutions; 3, increased investment in digital infrastructure; 4, a focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion; and lastly, collaboration and partnership building. And then keep in mind these legislative programs, some of which Jennifer mentioned, in order to evaluate different funding opportunities and grants that encourage investment in the UAS and advanced air mobility space. So keep in mind the Advanced Air Mobility Infrastructure Plan, the Biden Infrastructure Law, the Drone Infrastructure Inspection Act, Advanced Aviation and Infrastructure Modification Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Climate Build, and for those of you who focus on STEM and BIPOC, Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color, Build Back Better. So keep those in mind. Then, before we get to the money, I would actually ask, is federal funding the right fit for my organization? We've got several resources connected to this session. And so you'll find a link there that says, is federal funding the right fit for my organization? It's through the U.S. Department of Transportation. I would encourage many of you who have not received federal funding before to take a look at that alongside of your eligibility. Next, take a look at what federal agencies award grants. There are about 25 of them. Align yourself with those. And to look for upcoming announcements, take a look at key notices of funding opportunities. All right, and then for others of you who may not understand the different vehicles of funding, take a look at the overview of funding and financing. Okay, you'll get a lot of information that way. For those of you in research, there are the Small Business Technology Transfer, as well as the Small Business Innovation Research that really look at domestic businesses in terms of engaging in federal research and research. So don't forget to take a look at those. And then lastly, keep in mind the key to an attractive application is creating an effective, a compelling, and a comprehensive story that demonstrates the funding need, the funding commitment, and the impact. And then you talk about your products, services, and equipments. In general, for federal funding, grants.gov, about your best source, as well as those 25 agencies. If you go to their pages and just put in the search key grants or fundings, everything will come up from the previous grantees to the current awards to notices for funding.
Great segue into Lauren, who's actually kind of dug in with the DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit recently. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to work closely with the government and with Blue UAS?
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. As I had mentioned before, my company Modal AI has worked very closely with the DIU since the company's inception in 2018. We were able to win $9.5 million in contracts with the DIU. So I'm excited to share how we went about that process. And also, as Renee and Jennifer mentioned, going through those OTAs and some important call outs. So the number one thing that we did in the beginning was when we started Modal AI, we had two products, Voxel rather, our companion computer, and Flight Core, an autonomous flight controller. During the time that we started the company, our co-founder, Chad Sweet, saw that the DIU put out a commercial solutions offering, also known as a CSU, or CSO rather, which is basically a solicitation for the drone industry to kind of bring and show the government what technologies they already have out there and how the government can integrate it into their own solutions. The specific CSO that we answered the call for was for an autonomous companion computer and also a flight controller. So it matched up perfectly to the products that we already had. So that was step one. We answered the CSO. Our co-founder, Chad Sweet, he wrote a white paper talking about our technology, its capabilities, use cases, and how it could benefit the government. He also did a 3-hour pitch and live demo. Some feedback that he got during that pitch was that the government responded really well to the fact that we had a tangible physical product to show, and they can see the demos, etc. They don't really respond well to concepts and ideas that aren't created yet. So that's a good tip to have. You want to have a tangible product to show them when you are answering that CSO. We were lucky enough to move on to the next phase of this process, which was the request for prototype proposal, also known as RPP. During this phase, we negotiated with the government to figure out what are the milestones and technology requirements that we want to have for this final prototype once we receive this grant and funding from the government. And what we ended on was to create a single board companion computer and flight control. So essentially we had two separate, our voxel companion computer, our flight core flight control, and we wanted to merge them into one single board autopilot that was swap optimized and beneficial for smaller UAVs. So once we finished creating those negotiations and terms, we were officially under contract with the government mid-November 2018 for the OTA that Jennifer was mentioning earlier. And a year later, we launched VoxelFlight on the marketplace, and we were very excited to introduce our product to the drone industry and also to give that product as an option for the government. Some other thing that's important to note was when we were in the negotiations phase, the government really cares about products that are dual use. So what Renee was mentioning earlier is that they want to invest in companies that will also benefit not only the government themselves, but also the industry as a whole. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And so Voxel Flight then became the first founding autopilot for the Blue UAS framework program. And if anyone's familiar with the Blue UAS, it's basically the framework program that has a bunch of different technology that is approved by the government to use, including companion computers, radios, ground control systems. And so we were very fortunate to be a part of that. In 2020, we repeated the process all over again for this second CSO that was for the Blue UAS Framework 2.0 program, which was created kind of as a response and to fill in the gaps and meet the market needs for the NDAA 20 Section 848 Act, which essentially barred government entities from using drone components that were made in China. So we applied for the OTA again. We were lucky enough to get the funding, and that money was used to create our main flagship autopilot today, which is called Voxel 2, a 16-gram Blue UAS framework autopilot powered by the Qualcomm Flight QRB 5165. So we were very fortunate and happy to receive that second set of funding, and we launched Voxel 2 last year, and this year we're launching the bite-sized version of that, Voxel 2 Mini, powered by the same technology. So we're very grateful for the US government and their willingness to work with young, scrappy companies like Modal AI, who we really just want to help advance the drone industry with our Voxel autopilots.
So Renee, I have a quick follow-up question, if you have. How would you say that impacted, the growth and the capabilities of Modal AI? What's the impact of working with the government in the long term?
Yeah, I would say it's been a great impact, definitely helps with credibility, and we want to be able to provide the drone industry with reliable technology that's advanced and also very capable. So it's been great to work with them, get their support, and also attend events like this to help spread the word, because essentially we want OEMs to be able to develop on and integrate our products into their own bespoke drone fleets to help advance the industry in different use cases as well.
Wonderful. And Renee, I have another question for you. As we move into the state and local programs for grants and funding, can you tell us a little bit of what that landscape looks like and how it's kind of different and similar to federal funding?
Sure. The CARES Act, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and Jennifer, you mentioned that $1.2 trillion infrastructure investment, right? That's the largest outlay of our times right now. That was signed last month, once in a generation outlay. I would say in terms of the state and local, take a look at your county and your city municipalities. Liaison with your state administering agency, so your SAA. Look up the city agencies, like for instance, for Las Vegas, there are 12 departments I can easily go to. I actually have alerts out for all 12 agencies, as you mentioned, like FEMA, for emergency management. I would also say take a look at grant tools. So for instance, if you are a nonprofit, something like Instrumental is a tool that you could use. Police, for instance, use Police One. So there are some tools out there to help you with your grant search. I would say make sure your certifications are all on point if you're applying for bids and contracts. Many of the state grants, depending, some of the grants, money is passed along to the state, and then they can put it out for you to either bid or get a contract. For those of you who are for-profit versus nonprofits, generally look at foundations and corporation grants as well. Keep in mind that foundations normally give to charitable organizations, and that's tied to their financial assets. Because we had a pretty bad year with stock in 2022, they've become very risk conservative. But nevertheless, you can still look for some of the larger corporations from your Walmarts, Verizons. Those are the folks who actually get drones in the UAS space, right? Zach has an amazing project that he can elaborate on in terms of funding at the local level.
I do.
He does, yeah. Pass it on over. I want to get started. So you recently helped Mountain West get a grant for a drone flying park in Buena Vista, Colorado. Can you tell us about that whole process and lessons learned from that, and how that ties into the rest of the work you do?
Yeah, I realized when I was preparing for this morning that it's slightly ironic for me to be up here talking about a nonprofit in a panel called Show Me the Money. But bear with me. There are some threads, and I think it was actually great to listen to you three go first, because there are a lot of commonalities, a lot of themes I'm already picking up on how this process works. And I think the other thing that I would just say right off the bat before getting into the guts of this program that I worked on, there's no one size fits all, right? And it's especially with case studies. A lot of people will get up here and say, okay, write this down. Step one, it's not. I'm going to tell you one way that it worked for this group and some lessons that we learned. But, keep in mind that I think the theme of flexibility will keep coming up, that you've got to really adjust to what's in front of you. So as I mentioned, Mountain West UAS is a 501c3. They've been around since, I think, 2017. And I just joined the board in January, but I've been involved with them for several years now. So essentially, the bottom line is that a couple of years ago, I helped them apply for a grant through the Ray Foundation. It's a private foundation, and the Ray Foundation is based on encouraging aviation education for youth. So what was this grant for? Well, Mountain West UAS had a couple of initiatives that have been going really since the beginning. The first one is the drone flying park, and we've been negotiating with the town of Buena Vista since probably 2019, 2020 to convince them to offer a grant of land. It's not deeded over to us, that is reserved specifically for a drone training park. And there are a couple of unique characteristics about this. As I mentioned, it's not just open space where you can fly drones. This is a 35-acre plot just for drone flying. It's located about 8,000 feet altitude, so it gives a unique advantage as far as private companies that can come in there to train on this. So the drone flying park, once the land was secured, we started building it out, which was developing a different training courses for it. And that's when we started talking about fundraising. And so we drafted a grant, and we went through several applications through a lot of different groups. So it wasn't like this was the single one we had in mind. But we ended up getting a $50,000 matching grant, so $100,000 total, to support not only the drone training park, but critically, because of the Ray Foundation's mission, to help us get a drone training curriculum introduced in the local high school. So all of this was critical when we applied for the grant. And I think that's one of the big lessons learned that I'll just throw out there is be very purpose driven with your applications, and know that, on some level, yes, it's a numbers game. You're going to have to apply to a lot. But for each one, what made it really easy on my part with helping draft this is that we could tell them so specifically, listen, we have this 35-acre park that is just for drone training. We have a high school that has committed to introducing drone training for STEM curriculum. And the high school, part of why they were interested is because they had access to the drone park. So all of this kind of worked together, and the way that we could present it. And again, another theme of storytelling is that the narrative is such an important part of saying, this is not just, drones are going to be important and drones are going to be, in the future, everyone's going to use them. It's really drawing a picture of how specifically they're going to be used here. I mean, in our application got down to here's the equipment we're asking for. Here's where this money is going to go. I mean, it's not a black hole. Just give us the 50,000, we'll figure it out. So all of that, and it comes together, and I think that because a lot of my day job with corporate and transactional laws is working with private companies, thinking about not only the fundraising issue, raising capital, but looking at all the decisions that they have to make as far as even starting a company. What is their company? Is it going to be an LLC? Is it going to be a corporation? It's a lot of questions that we ask in the beginning that, frankly, a lot of people don't really consider. And then if you don't consider those questions at the outset, even some of the hard questions for a company or for a 501c3 nonprofit, what happens if it doesn't work, right? Where does the money go? What if the partners get divorced? And people hate talking about that when they're starting out, but it's critical. All of that is a long-winded way of saying that I think the thought and the preparation that went into not just Mountain West UAS as an entity, but getting the drone park, getting the education curriculum, all of that was very clear in the grant application. And so you can't fake that kind of preparation very well when you're applying for money. It's pretty transparent. So that's a very general overview.
Great, and I'm actually going to pick your brain a little bit more. You talk about telling a story, talk about, really having your ducks in a row. Any pitfalls or challenges that people should be aware of as you're going through this? Something that, a lesson learned or something along the lines of that you can share with the team so that they don't jump in 2 feet blind?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to hit pitfalls, and don't expect to avoid them altogether. But I think one of the most important lessons for me through this whole process, dealing with different community groups, different organizations, including and actually I should mention that too with this whole process, it was a matching grant. So they basically said, we're going to give you up to $50,000, but you're responsible for the other half, which meant then we turned around and we did go to the private sector. We went for, after individuals. It was a very grassroots effort. I mean, there was no major donor that came forth. But throughout that process, and this would include talking with the high school about the curriculum, talking with the town about getting the land grant, it's so easy for us in this room, and I'm so aware of this even on the legal side. We're sort of in a silo where everyone in this room says yes, drones are fantastic, and anyone who doesn't get that just doesn't get it, and it's our job to change their mind. There's a lot of listening that has to go on in this process too, and that is something else you can't really fake from the community's perspective, from getting the public to buy into automated technology. We've had some fascinating conversations with the town, with people who didn't want a drone flying park. And I think one of the best things we did was not sit there from the perspective of an advocate to try to change their mind, but actually to listen, and because, I've told this to a lot of people, there absolutely are parts of this emerging technology that make me nervous too, right? And I think that's fair to admit that it's not perfect right now. And so that part of the community engagement, when we talk about sort of winning over the public with automated technology in the next 10, 20, 100 years, it's not just a matter of us changing their minds. It's us realizing what these concerns really are and recognizing that there's some validity with some of it.
Yeah, and addressing how you're going to mitigate those concerns to the public. I love the fact that you brought up listening. I think it's such an important part with the public perception and how people are going to actually accept this into their community. You're not going to get any funding without that. Renee, you have something to add?
Something I've noticed recently in federal grants, they are actually asking what you're doing to provide outreach, public education, and awareness. I had not seen that actually in a grant application before.
Wow.
Something else that you mentioned also was you just keep writing the grants. Once you write a grant, that's a fundable document. You continue to outsource that and update it. When you write one proposal, get it out 3 to 5 times if you can, back to back. Maybe only one part may be funded, for instance, but you can get the other parts funded through other opportunities.
Well, while I have you, Renee, why don't you give us some of your lessons learned and best practices? You already got kick-started off, but it'd be great to hear.
I've got a couple of them here. 3, in terms of government relations, identify the agencies whose missions align with yours. Introduce yourselves, get very friendly, go ahead and attend events, maintain ongoing communications, and take advantage of all the resources they offer, and establish yourself as a valuable partner. Next, think about diversification as a key. If you don't have a diversified funding calendar, meaning only about 25% of your funding portfolio should be grants, think about diversification. That looks like fee-for-service, program services, interest on investment income, other sources of revenue, membership dues and fees, direct public support, and income from any special event or fundraising event. Make sure you've got a backup plan so that you are not chasing dollars in the short term, but that you're actually seeking opportunities to fuel your long-term mission. And then lastly, think entrepreneurially about revenue. Are you innovating? Are you creating strategies for financial stability? Think about what you do uniquely well, and then strengthen your network. Become a storyteller of why your solution is important, and move the hearts and the minds of those who can help. So that includes funders, sponsors, stakeholders, and any other connectors that you know. That's the key.
Well said. Yeah. All right. Lauren, would you like to share some of your best practices?
Yes, our main 3 lessons learned through the process of applying for this money from the government is, number 1, make sure you have a working prototype when you answer that CSO. As I mentioned before, the government doesn't want to see something, doesn't want to ask for a bespoke product and then have you meet that need. They want to see what's already going on in the industry and how they can integrate that into their own solutions. Number 2 is the government wants to work with you. So during the RPP and negotiation process, it may seem long and drag out, but ultimately they do want to see you succeed and help the industry grow based off of your technology and what you have to offer. And number 3 is to be patient. I know when working with the government and creating contracts, these things do take time, and sometimes you want to just hurry up and wait, but just be patient, because it will be worth it in the end. And definitely the check proves that it is worth it.
And it speaks to Renee's point of being diversified in your funding structure. Build this into it, but understand this is long-term funds. Jennifer, what about some lessons and best practices?
Yeah, I want to key in on something that I think everybody's spoken about, and Zach certainly did, and that's yes, be flexible about where you're looking for funding, because there are lots of different opportunities, but also be very careful and take a look in advance at what the compliance requirements are after you get the funding, and what what kind of an accounting system do you have in place, or accounting support. That's really important, because you're probably going to have to do some regular reporting. Are you thinking about any kind of big transactions in the next few years that might change your ownership? That's another sort of fly in the ointment in terms of these funding opportunities, because they're betting on you. You in particular. So you don't want to really change the game on them in the middle if you don't have to. Of course, if you do have to, they recognize that they might need to work with you on that. But those are really important things to be thinking about. For our clients that have federal funding, there's probably not a week that goes by that they're not on the phone with us trying to interpret one of the compliance rules and one of the reporting requirements, and how do they need to go about that. So, and then maybe just one final plug for partnering, which has been mentioned here. When you think about the programs you want to apply for, really think about whether you're the right person to apply for it. Or is it another organization that you could partner with? So, for example, we did comments with respect to the Public Innovation Fund that NTIA is administering right now for a massive global company. They're going to apply for that money, but they're not going to apply under their own name, right? They're going to use a smaller, more diverse company as the lead, and then they will work with that company. And so working on those partnerships is really important, whether it's state or federal funding.
Absolutely. Well said. And great advice on looking ahead to what you're signing into and whether you have the capacity to meet the reporting and the compliance. Absolutely. So I think that's the end of my questions. And so I'd like to open the floor now to questions from the audience, if there's any. Looks like we have a gentleman right over there.
I represent law enforcement agency in Virginia, and we've applied a couple of times for grants. We've gotten one back 4 years ago, which allowed us to start a drone program in the law enforcement agency. We applied for a second grant just very recently, and we've run into trouble where the federal government's not allowing us to purchase drones. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening and what can be done to alleviate this problem? I can buy accessories, but I can't buy the drone itself.
Is it a foreign-made drone? Not that issue.
Any drone right now.
Yeah. I mean, there are restrictions on using federal funds to purchase technology, and this isn't just related to drones, it's more broadly technology manufactured in China or that has China subcomponents. So that's at least one thing to think about. I'd have to look at your particular program to understand what the hang up is there, but does anybody have a thought about it?
Seek other sources of funding outside of the federal government. I mean, there are a lot of agencies that are utilizing certain drones that we won't mention that are not on the blue list. They find other means of funding, or maybe there's a portion you can still apply towards with the federal grant and then go somewhere else and get the money for that.
You know, and I'd also say you should meet an organization like US Ignite, because they often work with law enforcement in the local communities where they're trying to stand up, you know, new test beds for any number of purposes. So if you went, and they're doing drone testing, so that might be another way to go. And they have their money directly from the National Science Foundation. You know, they don't have to go back to the well for it, right? So maybe there's a way to crack the nut.
Gentleman over here.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about how we fund it. There's other ways that the federal government can incentivize. For example, the IPP program, the Integration Pilot Program, and Beyond Program, both had no funding attached, but it was more freedoms, permissions to do things. And so that I've seen, especially in our state, what we're trying to do is to incentivize communities, and counties, and tribes to do things. But there's a lot more benefit if someone shows some initiative. They show vision, they show enthusiasm, and the community says that we want to do this, we want to make some investments. Even if it's a minimal investment, it makes more sense to match rather than just use a pot of money and go after it. Sometimes there's a different enthusiasm involved in that. So I think we always have to look at, can the federal government seed things rather than totally fund things? Send signals to industry, send signals to investment. This is a safe place to invest.
That's a good point. Just to reiterate what he just said, you know, there are a lot of programs that are about testing and seeing and proving this technology. And although that might not lead to funding right away, it definitely shows legitimacy, especially in the eyes of investors and other people who are willing to put funding into place. It's also a great way to put that private community at ease by working with them and mitigating and listening to some of the challenges there. So great point to be brought up. Do we have any more questions? Way in the back there.
Yeah, my question is, if you're a small business or entrepreneur for profit, what is the best way to go for the STEM money?
So the question there is, if you're a nonprofit, how do you go for the STEM money? And I think, Renee, or for profit, how do you go for STEM support?
Okay, I'll start. One is don't forget about your donors. Donors give the largest amount of money out there. Think about sponsors, and I would definitely say partner. Make sure that one of your partners can be a fiscal agent and maybe is a nonprofit, especially because a lot of the grants in the STEM world are for charitable organizations. They haven't quite caught up fully yet, unless you're talking about a larger drone. For those of you looking for the larger pots of money, and that's kind of the federal government, $250,000 and up, partnering is the key. Anything below that, like a lot of the foundations and the corporations, they're starting to be a little more giving. And so if you have a solution to a need, not only are their applications shorter, but you might be able to get through in that way.
Any other, anyone else want to add anything? I'm seeing Zachary, he's thinking about it. All right, any other questions? Dawn?
Renee mentioned some private corporations like Walmart as an example, and I know when we spoke before, you mentioned that they also help law enforcement. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these corporations that are providing money to organizations like law enforcement or even young entrepreneurs for STEM?
So just to reiterate the question so everyone could hear it, what kind of corporate funding is there out there, like the Walmarts and the Amazons out there?
For the most part, most corporations have giving arms. You just have to look out there and find it. But honestly, if you just Google, most of them will pop right up. So it just depends on what area you're in. STEM is a little something different because that's educational focused. And think about it, our curriculum is not there yet. So you don't find a lot that way. You find money for teachers. You also find money through your states in terms of education and STEMs. I would say to the gentleman in law enforcement and emergency services, of course you have FEMA, Department of Justice. You may have workforce development grants I would look at. And then shout out to drone responders. They tend to have a network that knows how to get money and resources, not just to get a program started, but in order to sustain a program as well.
And just to follow up briefly on, again, kind of a general theme, but when I look at the case study that I just described to you all today, it had such a grassroots vibe to it. And a lot of that included donations from local businesses, I think including Walmart, but don't quote me on that. But the way that happened was because somebody in my organization picked up the phone, called the local Walmart and said, who would we talk to? The drone park was developed with a lot of lumber that was donated from the local lumber yard, you know? And again, this is one example. This is not a blueprint, but it was amazing to me through this whole process, watching how much could get done just by a lot of people being insanely committed to the task. And it never hurts to ask, do you offer grants? Do you want to donate some money for, you know, and have a good sales pitch for it and see what happens.
Small businesses, go ahead and partner. For instance, some of the grants that are out now, for instance, around infrastructure, say it's for bridges and roads. That doesn't mean a sole person who knows how to fly a drone can go and get that grant. But perhaps if you partner with a construction company whose business it is to build and do something with roads and bridges, you could be a subcontractor. So again, I would say make sure your city and state certifications are on point, whether you're a minority-owned business, a woman-owned business, or whatever the other veteran-owned, whatever the other certifications are.
Absolutely, good point. I mean, partnership, listening, also being specific and having a working prototype. Those seem to be the four major takeaways, but I see Dawn waiting here in the wings, so I think we're getting ready to wrap up. So I'm just going to do a fast round robin, starting again with Jennifer, and just tell us a little bit about just last words and how we can contact you if we have any more questions.
Last words, definitely take a look for some of these other transaction authority organizations that have that kind of funding and can help you fast track to these funding opportunities. And you can find me by, again, if you look for this in your bag and you look at this QR code, you're going to go to the Aiken website, and the back of that report, I'm there, or you can just go to aikengump.com and find me there.
Grab me on LinkedIn, Renee Welch, PhD. That's the easiest.
Last words are good luck and be patient. And Modal AI is exhibiting at the exhibit floor. We're booth 4534. So come by, get some more of those M&Ms that are in your bag. And if you have any other questions, please come by and see us.
Yeah, I'll be around all week. You can find me at 3ilawfirm.com. And yeah, I think we've really covered it. So, since I do have the microphone, I was just going to point out I have not seen Mellow Yellow as a drink choice in probably 20 years. So amazing. I don't know how old those are.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor speaking with each one of you today. You've given so much information. I'm taking a bunch of mental notes myself here, as everyone in this room is probably trying to figure out how to solve that funding puzzle. Thank you so much.